Let me ask you something simple. If your income stopped tomorrow, not forever, just for 3 months, what would actually happen? Not hypothetically. Think about it right now. Your rent or mortgage, your subscriptions, your insurance, your loan payments, your groceries. Would you be fine? Would you be stressed, but manageable? Or would things start breaking down within weeks? Most people, when they sit with that question honestly, feel an uncomfortable tightness in their chest. Not panic, just a quiet, unsettling recognition that stopping is not really an option. And what's interesting is that most of those same people genuinely believe, that they are working by choice. Today we are going to look at why that belief may not be entirely accurate. We are going to walk through 5 levels of financial dependence, not as a rigid scale, but as a real map of how different people actually live and how much control they truly have. By the end of this video, you will understand not just where you might sit on that map, but why the entire system tends to pull people toward needing to work continuously, regardless of how much they earn. Stay until the end, because the final question I leave you with is probably the most useful thing you will take from this. Picture this. You have been working for several years. The job is fine, not terrible, not extraordinary. One afternoon, you genuinely consider taking a break. Not quitting, not retiring, just pausing for a few months, maybe to travel, or rest, or figure out what you actually want from the next chapter. And then, almost immediately, the mental calculation begins. Rent is due at the start of every month. The car loan comes out automatically. There are credit card balances that carry interest. Health insurance requires uninterrupted enrollment. The phone plan, the internet, the streaming services, the gym membership, the grocery budget, they do not pause because you decided to pause. Within roughly 40 seconds of having that thought, the fantasy of stopping collides with a very concrete financial structure, and the structure wins. So you go back to work, not because you made a clear, deliberate choice, but because the architecture of your financial life did not give you another option. This is where the real conversation starts. The ability to stop working, even temporarily, is not primarily a question of desire or discipline. It is a question of financial structure. And most people have built, often without fully realizing it, a structure that makes stopping genuinely dangerous to their stability. This is not about whether someone is responsible or irresponsible. It is not about intelligence. It is about a system. And like any system, it operates according to its own logic, not according to your feelings about it. The critical insight is this. There's a spectrum of financial dependence, and where someone sits on that spectrum determines how much actual control they have over their time. Not how much they earn. Not how hard they work. Not even how smart their decisions have been. The structural relationship between their income, their obligations, and their savings is what determines their options. And across the population, people exist at very different points on this spectrum. At the most constrained end of this spectrum sits what you could call level 1, and it is the most common position, though few people who are in it would describe themselves that way. Here, a single missed paycheck creates an immediate crisis, not discomfort, an actual crisis. There are no savings functioning as a buffer. Fixed costs, rent, utilities, debt payments, insurance, consume nearly all incoming money. The math is precise and unforgiving. Income in, obligations out, nothing left. This is not a temporary situation for many people in this position. It is a structural condition that has been building for months or years. Every fixed cost that gets added to a life, a new lease, a financed appliance, a recurring payment, tightens the dependency further. The person living here does not have the experience of choosing to work. They have the experience of being unable to stop. And what makes this level particularly difficult to exit is that the pressure of it leaves almost no cognitive space to think structurally. Survival thinking and strategic thinking rarely coexist. Moving slightly along the spectrum, level 2 looks more stable on the surface, and that surface appearance is actually part of what makes it tricky. There is some savings here, perhaps enough to cover 1 or 2 months of expenses. The person is not in immediate crisis territory, but they can feel the pressure begin to build from the moment income stops. The calculation becomes more conscious. Week 1 feels manageable. Week 3 starts to feel tight. By week 6, the savings buffer is narrowing towards zero, and the emotional weight of that narrowing is significant. Decisions made under that pressure are rarely good ones. They take whatever work appears, not necessarily what makes sense for them. The illusion at this level is that having any savings means having security. What it actually means is having a slightly delayed version of the same problem. Further along the spectrum, level 3 is where many people who consider themselves financially responsible tend to live, and it offers real advantages, but also a subtle trap. There is a more meaningful cushion here. Several months of expenses held in savings, perhaps some assets, fewer high-interest debts. The person at this level can genuinely pause without immediate structural damage. But the trap is subtle. They are still fundamentally dependent on income returning. The buffer creates space, not freedom. And because their lifestyle has often grown alongside their income, their monthly obligations are typically higher than those of someone earning less. A larger salary paired with a larger apartment, a financed car, private school fees, and a mortgage means that even a substantial savings account can deplete faster than expected. The dependence has not disappeared. It has simply been given a longer runway. And a longer runway can create a false sense of having solved the problem, when the underlying structure has not actually changed. Continuing along the spectrum, level 4 represents a position that relatively few people reach, not because it requires extraordinary wealth, but because it requires deliberate structural choices that most people never make. Here, people have actively reduced the ratio between their fixed obligations and their income. They have assets generating some return. They have fewer liabilities. Their monthly burn rate is lower relative to what they hold. These people have real flexibility. They can negotiate with time. They can consider a career shift, a geographic move, a period of reduced work without it becoming a financial emergency. They are not fully independent, but they have meaningfully loosened the grip of continuous income dependency. Choices that are unavailable to most people are accessible to them. What distinguishes this level from the one below it is not just the numbers. It is the quality of the decisions those numbers make possible. And then there is level 5, and it is worth being precise about what this actually looks like, because it is frequently misunderstood. This is not necessarily a picture of extraordinary wealth or early retirement or a life of complete leisure. It is a structural position. The person here has built their financial life to the point where it continues functioning without immediate reliance on a single income source. Assets generate returns. Income is diversified across more than one stream. Obligations are controlled and proportionate. Stopping work even for an extended period does not trigger a cascade of structural problems. Work, when they do it, is genuinely chosen. The calculation no longer carries urgency. This level is less common than popular financial media implies, but it is also more achievable than most people believe. Not through dramatic windfalls, but through the slow, deliberate redesign of financial structure over time. What is worth understanding is why most people remain at the earlier levels, and more importantly, why the modern financial environment makes movement along this spectrum so difficult. The structure of contemporary life systematically encourages high fixed costs. Housing requires commitments, leases, mortgages that lock in monthly obligations for years at a time. Consumer financing makes it easy to acquire things that create permanent payment schedules. Healthcare, childcare, and education create costs that are not optional and not small. And layered over all of this is the quiet social expectation that as your income grows, your lifestyle should expand proportionally. This last point is perhaps the most significant mechanism. Earning more does not automatically reduce dependence. In fact, for many people, it increases it, because more income generates more confidence, which generates more fixed commitments, which generates more structural fragility. A person earning significantly more than they did 5 years ago may actually have less ability to stop working than they did at the lower income level, because their obligations have grown faster than their buffer. There is also a psychological dimension that runs alongside the financial one. People tend to conflate the feeling of control with actual control. Having a good salary creates a subjective sense of security that may not reflect the structural reality. And because work is deeply tied to identity, to how people describe themselves, how they are perceived socially, how they structure their days, The idea of stopping carries emotional weight that goes beyond finances. Stopping work, even temporarily, can feel like losing something essential about who you are. This feeling serves the system perfectly. It means that even people who could technically pause are often psychologically prevented from doing so. There is also something historically consistent about this dynamic. Dependency structures have existed across different economic systems and eras. The forms change: feudal obligations, industrial wage labor, modern debt-financed consumption, but the underlying pattern remains recognizable. Systems tend to be built in ways that make continuous participation feel necessary or natural. The specific mechanisms evolve. The general effect persists. Against this backdrop, there are three patterns that tend to deepen dependence over time, often without the person fully recognizing what is happening. The first is treating income increases as invitations to expand lifestyle, rather than invitations to reduce structural vulnerability. Every time income rises and expenses rise proportionally, the ratio stays the same. Nothing has actually changed at the structural level. The second is underestimating the compounding weight of fixed costs. A single fixed commitment is manageable. The accumulation of 5 or 6 of them, each reasonable on its own, creates a monthly floor that becomes very difficult to lower quickly. The third is confusing income level with financial independence. These are genuinely different things. Independence relates to the relationship between obligations and assets, not to the size of a paycheck. The shifts that meaningfully alter someone's position on the spectrum are not primarily about earning more. They are about reducing the structural dependency itself, narrowing the gap between what life costs at a minimum and what someone holds. Building optionality, meaning having more than one viable path for income or asset generation, changes the risk profile fundamentally, and creating space, a real margin, between incoming money and outgoing obligations is what transforms theoretical flexibility into actual choice. It is worth acknowledging directly that some people genuinely do have the structural position to choose their relationship with work. People who built diversified income early, who kept obligations deliberately low relative to their assets, who avoided the lifestyle expansion trap, or who inherited structural advantages, these people are not imaginary. They exist, and understanding how they got there is more instructive than resenting the position. The honest and useful question is not whether work is good or bad, whether ambition is admirable or misguided. The question is structural, not do you want to stop working, but could you stop if you needed to? If the answer requires significant hesitation, if the mental calculation starts immediately, if the anxiety appears before the thought is even finished, then you now understand what that means. It means the structure, not the desire, is making the decision. And structures, unlike desires, can be redesigned. Not quickly, not easily, but deliberately and over time. That is probably worth more attention than most people give it. If this video made you think differently about your own financial structure, consider sharing it with someone who might be asking the same quiet questions. And if you want to go deeper into how financial structures actually get rebuilt at a practical level, the next video is already waiting for you.